Hello and good morning. Uh, I'm so happy to be here today and certainly appreciate Kayla and Katie for giving me the opportunity to lead this group today. Um, I will have to say that I'm just a tad nervous as I've not done a grief group exactly this way before, but excited for the opportunity to learn. I thought I might start by introducing myself for those who may not know me. Of course, my name is Dana Emanuel, and have recently come on board with Arden in Hardin County as the chaplain and bereavement coordinator. I have a little bit of a specialty in grief. So I owned a flower shop in the Alabama area for many, many years, and through the work there, was able to see the need in my community for a place for people to take their grief. Um, I did a good bit of training so I could educate myself a little bit better so I would be better able and prepared to help those in my community. So I was able to offer monthly, bi monthly grief support group meetings and then also one on one grief recovery
And
care to those who wanted to meet one on one. So today, I think that we will start with talking about the myths of grief. Of course, grief is something that we all experience, but most people do not want to talk about. It's one of the least talked about subjects by people. Wanted to share the definition that I like most about grief with you, and that is that grief is the normal and natural emotional reaction to loss or change of any kind. And it is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of
okay,
behavior.
well, I'll be up there.
Um, One way to think about it,
Okay,
an example might be recently for me that my dad, I lost him in January. He, I hated to see him continue to live as he did because his quality of life was not very good. But then I also hated to see him pass away. So grief is a lot, like two feelings that don't go together. So that might help you. It helped me to understand it and look at it that way. So it's also described as reaching out for someone who's always been there but isn't there any longer. So, first of all, let's maybe think about when I first got into grief work, I had probably thought most of my life that grief was something that we related to a person who died or passed away. And so I was really surprised to learn through some of my grief training that it's actually 40 plus different loss experiences. So maybe as I go through 2 or 3 examples of that, you can maybe think about some things in your life that you may not have realized were grief experiences. For me, one of the big grief experiences was the divorce of my parents when I was 3 years old, and how that impacted me going forward most all of my life until I had the opportunity to start getting some grief training, and I just didn't realize that. Some other examples might be moving, changing schools, divorce, something comes up with your health. Maybe you didn't get the promotion at work that you thought you would get. Um, just all kinds of different things that again we may not think about um, that cause us grief. So think about your life and as I'm talking and what types of grief that you might have experienced other than a loss related to death. And maybe that'll help you to see that you've had some grief in your life that maybe you didn't realize that you had. So today we're going to be unlearning some of the myths that we've been taught about grief. So the first one that we'll start with is the one of keeping busy. This one, if I'm honest, is a little bit of a struggle for me because I think that God just wired me to be busy. A very driven person and normally always doing something. But I think for me, I've had to ask myself now, since I've learned that avoiding pain can kind of make you always want to stay busy. But I've had to ask myself, what is driving me to be busy? Um, because I understand those of us who are just wired that way. But I think if we can stop sometimes, especially if we've gone through a grief experience, and just think about what is it that's driving me to be busy. So, busyness can delay grief, but it doesn't heal it. Um, and so I'm going to give you an example. When I once led grief support groups in Alabama, someone attended one evening and her name was Miss Sarah. And Miss Sarah, earlier in life, had lost both of her parents in a short time frame. And then one day, she found herself experiencing health problems and she could no longer work. So, of course, she had the grief of not being able to work any longer because she didn't necessarily want to go home, but her health wouldn't continue to allow her to do the things that she wanted to do. So she went home and she said that she began just cleaning in a way that she hadn't before, cleaning out closets, throwing things away that she had had forever, and then after all of that was done, she just sat down and she said, it had been 15 years since my parents passed. But as I sat there, I began to realize that I had never grieved the loss of my parents. I had been so busy raising my children, being a wife, working, and it just really hit me that my parents are no longer here. So maybe some of you understand that, and that might help you to think about have I really taken the time to process and to allow myself to experience the pain of loss? Another similar example would be a daughter who organized closets. She handled paperwork, cleaned the garage, and stayed constantly active after her mother died. Months later, when things slowed down, she broke down in tears at the grocery store when she saw her mom's favorite cereal. And the grief had always been there. It was just simply waiting. And so, from a faith perspective on this one, let's remember that even Jesus paused to grieve. A short reference is when Jesus wept at Lazarus's tomb in John 11:35. He didn't stay busy to avoid the emotion. So, our key takeaway from this one is grief needs space and not distraction. So, moving on to number two, this grief myth that we need to unlearn is grieve alone. Often people say, I don't want to burden anyone. No one will understand my grief. It's my pain to carry, or something that would probably a topic for another time is I could talk to this person, but I feel like I feel bad for it because their grief is actually worse than mine. So sometimes we grieve alone because we're comparing grief. And grieving alone also leads to isolation and prolonged grief. It leads to health issues, it leads to mental decline. Um, and what's really happening is that people don't feel emotionally safe. They don't feel like that they have someone that they can go to. Often you would think that one family member would go to another family member, but sometimes we don't see that because our family members are telling us how to grieve. They think we should be getting over it. And several of the folks that would come to my grief support group meetings, they would say, I can't talk to my family about it because they don't feel like that I'm moving on soon enough. They don't feel like that I'm cleaning out the closet soon enough. So a lot of them just needed a safe place to come where they could be heard and say whatever they needed to say without being judged for it or without being told how to grieve. A perfect example of seeing someone grieve alone, and it was particularly hard for me because it was my dad. He lost his wife, and I would encourage him to come to the grief support group meetings, but dad felt it better that he stay at home. And in doing so, he became isolated. And a couple of years after my stepmother passed, I found that he was in the beginning stages of dementia. So he didn't want to get out. He was depressed. And maybe if he had made himself come to the grief group meetings or continue to attend church, um, things would be different today, but he couldn't find it in himself to do that. And I know that that is hard. I've been through some things in my own life where it would have been easier, like after he died, I, on the fourth day after my dad's funeral, of just, really grieving the fact that, that my dad's physical body died, but I had to accept the fact that I was grieving who my dad was before dementia. And so I woke up that morning and I said, Dana, you can stay here in this pit of grief, which it's okay to do. Um, if we just don't stay there. I think at some point or the other, everyone goes to the pit of grief. But what's important is that we just don't stay there and we turn um, that pain into a purpose of some kind. So, a truth about grieving alone is that isolation deepens the pain and healing often happens in community. We are wired for connection. One of the places in talking about my dad that I see grieve alone a lot is in particular, with men, um, because they just don't want to cry in front of others. And we'll get to another uh, myth in a few minutes about that one. But another story example is a gentleman who told me he sat in his recliner every evening after his wife died, not wanting to call anyone. Finally, a neighbor stopped by and just sat quietly with him. He later said, "That was the first night that I slept. Sometimes we don't need words, we just need another person's presence." And I found that true in those grief support group meetings. There were people who would come, and probably the first two or three times, they didn't say anything, and that was good. It was just the fact that they were there. They were surrounding themselves with other people. And so, from a faith perspective on this one, we are called to carry one another's burdens. It says in Galatians 6:2, God designed us for community, and but we also need people who are willing to sit with us. Another great example from a faith perspective is Job and his friends. They showed up, they came to him, they wept with him, and they sat with him in silence for 7 days and nights. And also in Ecclesiastes, two are better than one. If either falls, one can help the other up. So, our key takeaway on this one is grief shared is not grief diminished, but becomes grief that is supported. Myth number 3, don't feel bad. Um, let's remember on this one that people often say, stay positive. They wouldn't want you to be sad, and a lot of other things that people say that are meant, they're well-intending sentiments, but they don't necessarily help. And often don't feel bad says more about the people around us who want to fix us than they do about the griever. And so sometimes what they are actually saying is, your feelings are uncomfortable to me, so you just try not to have them. And that isn't very helpful. The truth is that sadness is a natural and healthy response to love. It's human feelings. Grief often needs permission and not pressure. Um, so, a story example on this one would be a woman apologized for crying during a visit and said, I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I told her, your tears are evidence of love. You don't cry over things that didn't matter. And so I've had a lot of people apologize to me for crying, and often it's unexpected. Um, but I tell them there's no need to apologize for human feelings. And on Don't Feel Bad, a faith perspective on this one is that the Bible is full of lament, which is, if you don't know the definition of that, it is the honest expression of sorrow, pain, or confusion. Bringing your pain into the open instead of burying it. Lament says, I'm hurting, but I'm bringing my pain to you. And we all need that one person in our lives that we can trust to take whatever to, especially with our grief, that won't judge us for it. Um, the Bible, again, is full of lament. The Psalms show faithful people expressing sorrow honestly. One great example of that is David. Faith doesn't remove grief. It gives us permission to bring it to God. So what maybe would it look like for you to give yourself permission to feel your loss? Another example is Jesus. I once thought I had believed all my life that it was wrong to question God, and some of you may not agree with me on this one, but for me, um, I think Jesus probably felt bad when and maybe some grief when he asked God, why have you forsaken me? And someone brought that to my attention, and I had not thought about that before, but it helped me tremendously. So, what would it look like if you gave yourself permission to feel a loss? And I understand that no one wants to feel pain. It's not anything that we enjoy for sure. So it's a lot easier to avoid it. But really, we're just kind of putting it back here. And at some point, it may be 6 months, it may be, for me, it was many, many years because I was 3 when my parents divorced, right? So I didn't really deal with that till I was probably 45 years old. But I did not know the impact that it was having on my life. And after I was able to work through some of that, it brought me a joy that I had never been able to experience. So let's move on to myth number 4. Replace the loss. Often, what people say is get another pet, find something else to focus on, have another child, get another job, get remarried. So often we find that after we've experienced a death in particular, people try to set it, especially if you lost a spouse, our friends will try to set us up with someone new. Or another great example is maybe when you were a child, you may have had a little dog or a kitten or a cat or something that you loved. And so um, maybe after that pet died, your parents or someone in your life said, "Well, we'll just go down to the Humane Society and we will get another one." And or maybe you can think about being in elementary school or even middle school, and maybe you had a little girlfriend or a boyfriend, and they broke up with you. And the common thing for people to say is, and you may know the answer, there's lots of other fish in the sea. But what they often don't realize is there's not another pet or another fish in the sea that is going to be the same as the relationship that you had with the other one. And so, kind of sometimes we're brushed off instead of being allowed to talk about that relationship or the pain that we experienced with that particular loss. So nothing replaces a person or relationship. That is always going to be unique. And one of the ways that we do heal is not by replacing, but by remembering. So from a faith perspective, Ecclesiastes reminds us that there is a time to mourn and God always honors remembrance. We don't replace love, we carry it forward. We don't move on from the loss, but we move forward with it. So what is something today or something that you could never replace, but you can carry it with you? Okay, so myth number 5 is what people say. They say that time heals all wounds. Um, the truth is that time alone does not heal, and I do hear that one a lot, and it makes good sense, right? But I think it's more about what we do with or within that time that matters. In leading grief support groups, and then also offering grief recovery, which let me clarify that. I don't think that we ever truly recover from our grief. We just learn to move forward with it and find a purpose for it. But our grief support groups were maybe just a time for people to come together and talk about it. But maybe it was doing the one-on work within ourselves that actually it's what we did within that time that matters. So maybe doing some work on ourselves. A story example of give it time is someone I met who said, "It's been 3 years. I should be over this, but grief doesn't follow a calendar." And once they began talking about their loss, they finally started healing. And also realizing that no one's grief journey is the same. Everyone's at a different place in time. So, although I might be doing pretty good 3 months out from my dad's death, someone else may be 3 months out, but not near as far along in the journey. So, from a faith perspective on this one, healing often involves intentional steps, prayer, reflection, and community. Um, our key takeaway is healing takes intention, not just time. So, what maybe has helped you through difficult seasons? Was it time alone, or was it what happened during that time that helped you? Was it grief support, or was it grief work? Myth number 6, be strong for others. People often say, I have to hold it all together. This one may be the most praised and misunderstood messages in grief. And I have a couple of examples of that. So, leading a grief support group meeting at the church I attend here in Hardin County, I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of ladies who were older than me. I'm going to say probably in their 80s, maybe early 90s. And they would come to the grief support group meetings. And as we talked and had different topics, they would share that they were brought up in a time where you were taught to be strong. And so they had spent their whole lives not really talking about the grief that they felt as it related to different losses, and in particular, death, because at their age, they had lost several people. So it was very helpful for them to realize that being strong wasn't necessarily helpful. And also realizing that our strength can become a mask because while we're appearing to be strong for so many other people, we're not really addressing our pain. So the truth is showing emotion gives others permission to grieve. Um, Another example that I'd like to point out is when parents and children try to be strong for each other. They've lost the same individual, but they're so busy trying to be strong for others that they don't honestly deal with their pain. And sometimes, in allowing ourselves to express it, we are giving someone else permission. I often see that with parents who don't want to cry in front of their children, but sometimes that helps our children because it gives them permission to open up and to talk and to cry. So just remember that sometimes allowing yourself to display your grief helps someone else to deal with theirs. An example, a father held back tears after his wife died because he wanted to be strong for his children. When he finally cried in front of them, they all embraced. Later, he said, that was the moment we all began to heal as a family. So, from a faith perspective on this one, there's strength in faith, and it includes vulnerability. Even David cried openly before God. The key takeaway on this one is real strength is honest emotion. So maybe right now you could ask yourself, where do I feel I have to be strong right now? What would it look like for me to let my guard down and even feel a little safe with someone that I feel safe with? So, um, in closing, let's remember grief is not something to fix, it's something to walk through. And we don't need to walk alone. Scripture reminds us that God is close to the brokenhearted. When we allow ourselves to grieve honestly, we create space for comfort, healing, and hope. So, um, let's just go over these 6 griefs one more time. And you think about where you are with those. Number 1, keep busy. Number 2, grieve alone. Number 3, don't feel bad. Number 4, replace the loss. Um, Number 5, give it time. And number 6, be strong for others. So maybe all of you could think about those and what you've been taught, and maybe think about unlearning those. So, thank you so much for letting me join you today. Anytime that I can be of help, I'd certainly be happy to. So, please reach out.